Hey guys, how's it going? Azrach Collections here, and today we're doing another action figure review. This time we're looking at the McFarlane DC Multiverse Killer Croc action figure. So taking a look at the box, the front has a big window. You can see Killer Croc through it. It's got DC Multiverse Killer Croc written at the bottom there. On the top right it says 12 plus, so it's basically for people that are 12 plus. On the top we've got a logo of the Arkham Asylum video game. On this side of the box we have the logo of the video game and Killer Croc Batman Arkham Asylum written there, as well as McFarlane Multiverse logo at the bottom there. At the back, we've got a huge image of Killer Croc. It's a really cool image from the game. It says Killer Croc Batman Arkham Asylum on the top left, 22 moving parts, and from McFarlane Toys. And at the bottom, you've got some socials for McFarlane, and at the right, you've got the DC Multiverse logo. The picture of Killer Croc is really awesome. It's ripped from the game, but it looks really cool, and the packaging basically, if you put it like this on your shelf, it's really going to stand out. So I really like that about this packaging. On this side, you've got the wraparound of the window, and basically it says Killer Croc DC Multiverse. And at the bottom, you've got a bunch of legal details, and it basically gives you a barcode for this action figure. So here we have Killer Croc outside the packaging, and first impressions is that this guy is pretty phenomenal looking. There's a lot of good sculpt work going on. There's a lot of details. It looks like a monstrous, grotesque kind of figure. There is a little bit of a lacking paint in terms of paint applications, and the articulation can be a little better. First impressions, just playing it a little bit outside the box, but it's still a really good looking figure, really imposing, has a lot of presence and details. So it's gonna look absolutely stunning on your shelf. But let's get into more details to see if it has the articulation or if it captures the game version of Killer Croc accurately or not. So looking at this Killer Croc up close and comparing it to the in-game model, there are a slight few differences. The head on this Killer Croc is a little bit different. So the snout and the nose is sticking out a little bit more than it would be in the game. In the game it's more sunken in, more like a human face. This one looks more like it's trying to be, I don't know, it's more protruding. I think that's the best way to put it. The ears are missing, or basically less detailed. In the game, the game model of Killer Croc has more details in the ear. It might just be like putting in some shading in there, because as you can see over here, there is some detail of the ear actually being there, but it's not shaded in properly. If you look at the face a little bit closer, we are supposed to have more dark, basically spikes coming out of his under lip or the lower lip, and then there's supposed to be more spikes on his chin. That's missing. The skin tone all over the body is a little bit lighter than I would expect it to be. Looking at the game models, it should be a little bit darker, so this is way too light. And as an extension to that, the chest piece is also very light, so that's a little bit different. There's a chain that should be hanging from the neck, which is missing. Obviously you can add your own, but I mean, it would have been really cool if they had added that in. These spikes, some of them should be a darker color, which we're missing. It should be similar to the nails or the spikes here. It should be like a darker color, which is missing. The gauntlet should have more silver parts, so all of these metal parts should be more silver. And also with his ankles, he should have chains, which is missing, but I can understand the chain part, but everything else is a little bit different from the actual game model. So with that being said, the differences with the in-game model is apparent, but there is still a lot to love about this Killer Croc action figure. For starters, the eyes look really menacing. They're sunken in, but they're still piercing, so that's really, really cool. The scales are sculpted so well. The chest scales are actually sculpted better than the in-game model, which is really awesome. The paint, if you maybe put a black wash on it, it'll look a lot better, which is working for the figure. There's a lot of sculpt details, so this is a phenomenal level of sculpt details, texturing and all of that, which is absolutely incredible. The pants look great as well. There's some dirt or something like that painted at the bottom here, so that part of the pants look a little bit dirtied up, which is really, really cool. I really appreciate that. And it's leaking over a little bit to the part above the shackle as well. The trunks are a softer material, and they pretty much get out of the way when you need it to. And yeah, I mean, in terms of sculpt, this figure is really, really, really awesome. sculpted, and kudos to whoever at McFarlane sculpted this. Moving on to the aesthetics of the figure and basically the proportions. The proportions look pretty much right. This is a monstrous kind of figure, so you don't have to worry about that human kind of anatomy not being at the right spot. This can be more stylized or characterized, which is pretty cool. The biceps are pretty huge, which is pretty good. The back is massive and it's a little bit hunched over as well. The chest is done really well. There's a lot of good cuts that are not... So the articulation, I think there are some really deep cuts, but then it's cut in a way where it doesn't bother you too much, so that's really good. The legs are a little bit shorter in comparison to the body, but that works out really well, especially if you're comparing it to the game model as well. Killer Croc is supposed to be a little bit top heavy and have a lot of big muscles up top, so that works out really well. The legs, even though they are not as muscular or as big, they're really sculpted well, and they really fill out, or they really complete Killer Croc. So that's a really good look for Killer Croc, and there's a lot of good details, and I'm 100% behind it. The only thing that I don't like about it, and we'll get to that when we reach the comparison section, is that this Killer Croc is a tiny bit shorter than he should be. In the game, it says that Killer Croc is supposed to be around 11 feet tall. If you convert that to 7-inch scale, it should be a lot taller than 9 inches, and this guy is around 9 inches, but we'll get to that at a later state. Moving on to articulation, this guy has a pretty cool turn in the head, and it's notched, but then that's pretty much all the head can do. It cannot look up and down, which is pretty disappointing, because if he wants to look at somebody that's standing right in front of him, because they're going to be smaller than Killer Croc, he will not basically be able to look down just using the head. Maybe he can use the body, we'll get to that a little bit later. But basically with the arms, he can kick up the arms about that much, which is pretty much 90 degrees. There is a swivel at the shoulder connection here, no bicep swivel. There's a single joint in the elbow, which can go about that much. There's a wrist hinge, and you can rotate him at the wrist, which is decent. You can do that for both arms. I'll get that down. The back can basically, or the ab cut can basically go back that much, which if I take that away, it's that much. And he can crunch up about that much. So he can't crunch forward at all. He can use his lower torso a little bit. So let's try that out. Oh, actually, he can't really use the lower torso. I can't get it to move, and I can't get it to swivel either. So his upper torso can swivel, which is good. But I can't get the lower torso to function or swivel, which kind of sucks. I'm not sure if it's stuck somewhere in there. So I can see in there, I'm not sure if it's stuck somewhere in there, but I can't get it to function properly. The legs can do a full split, which is awesome. They can swivel around at the thigh joint here. There's a double joint in the knees, which crunch up okay for a big figure. That's pretty good for a big figure, actually. You get up and down movement at the leg or the foot, which is not that bad. He can pivot possibly a little bit. It's just set a little bit further back. So the pivot is set back, so you have to twist it a little bit differently than you would a normal ankle pivot, but it still works. And he's got the toe articulation. So pretty good in terms of articulation for a big guy, but then yeah, it's lacking the torso going front and back. I mean, I've seen a lot of videos for McFarlane where you can cut out a notch at the abs, and then that basically gives you more range. But then having to do that on a figure that you buy for about 60 AUD for me is like a bummer, because you know you want a figure that's complete. And this figure, I mean, although it is pretty great, there's a lot of good sculpting details on it. The articulation leaves a little bit to be desired, because he cannot look down and face the opponent he is facing because he is too tall and his abs don't crunch, or his head can't move down, which is pretty much a bummer. And the other thing I found is, for me, this leg is a little bit floppy. And I guess, yeah, I could use some Kiki joint fix to make it a little bit tighter. But then again, like with everything else being ratcheted, it's just weird that that's a little bit floppy. So in terms of posability, or not the articulation, basically getting Killer Croc into poses, it is a little bit limited because Killer Croc, obviously the torso does not move as much as you'd like. You can still do a few cool things to make him stand on the shelf looking animated, and this is one of the poses that I could get him in about 2 minutes, where he's trying to punch his fist into his other hand, which looks pretty cool, but then you know, it's still limited in articulation. So you can, the figure articulates, but not in a meaningful way, if that makes sense. So here I've got Killer Croc in kind of a walking pose, and the other thing I noticed when posing him into this pose is basically the elbows move, elbows rotate in and out at the elbow joint, so the elbow joint can basically pivot around. But the other thing I noticed is because he is a more muscular, burly kind of figure, his arms can't come down straight up and down, so they're basically flaring out a little bit. So it kind of looks weird when he's doing some certain poses. So it looks a little bit awkward. He looks like he's walking out of the gym rather than just walking. So I guess that's something to consider. Regardless of the limitations, this Killer Croc still has amazing shelf presence, and this pose is one of them that really highlights it. I think that even though this Killer Croc cannot do too many poses, if you put him in the right kind of frame, or if you do the right thing with him, he'll still look really imposing and really good on your shelf. So in terms of height, this Killer Croc is a little bit shy of 9 inches, and if you look at the game statistics for Killer Croc, in the game he is supposed to be 11 feet. Converting that into inches or 1/10 scale, 9 inches is still a little bit too short. But let's have a look at Killer Croc with other figures so we can actually gauge how tall he is. So here we have Killer Croc next to some other Batman figures from the McFarlane DC Multiverse line. On the left we've got the Arkham Asylum Batman, and on the right we've got the Arkham Knight Batman. Both of the Batman are a little bit shorter than Killer Croc, but Batman should be a lot shorter if you're looking at the game. I think in a comic book kind of aspect or comic book kind of ratio, this still works. Batman is shorter than Killer Croc, but I would just have appreciated it more if Killer Croc was a little bit taller. Moving on, here we have the Arkham City Joker on the left, which is a little bit shorter than Killer Croc, but it's from the same DC McFarlane Multiverse line. On the right, we've got the Mattel DC Robin action figure from Arkham City. And now comparing him to some other mega figs, here we have Swamp Thing on the left and Titan Joker on the right from Arkham City. And these figures are also mega figs, and I really wish that Killer Croc was at least as tall as Swamp Thing. I mean, that would have been the perfect scale for this action figure, but McFarlane chose to go a little bit smaller in terms of scale. I don't know why that is, but Swamp Thing would have been a better scale for this Killer Croc to be in, so that he would scale properly with the other guys in the line. So comparing this Killer Croc next to some other Killer Crocs, here we have the DC Mattel Multiverse Collect and Collect Killer Croc on the left, DC Mattel Multiverse Collect and Collect Suicide Squad Killer Croc, that's in the front, and the Me Toys Kid Bash Custom Gameverse Abomination Body Killer Croc from the Multiverse Head Kid Bash on the right. And I think they all scale pretty well, and I think in terms of sculpt, the McFarlane DC Multiverse Killer Croc is probably the best, but the mixed media Killer Croc on the right from Me Toys is probably my favorite one. So next up, here we have Killer Croc next to Marvel Legends action figure on the left, which is the Marvel Legends Ben Reilly Spider-Man, and on the right we've got the BVS Mezco Batman. And next up, we've got Killer Croc next to one of my all-time favorite action figures, the Mafex Batman Hush Batman. And yeah, the scale works pretty well with this figure. At the end of the day, with everything being said, this action figure is a pretty cool action figure, and it will look amazing on the shelf. It's got a lot of good sculpting details and a lot of good features that really highlights what Killer Croc is and how scary and menacing he's supposed to look in the Arkham games. And this is a really good representation of the Arkham video games Killer Croc. The only issue I have with him is that he is a little bit short, and I wish he was taller. And also the articulation, although there is a lot of articulation on this figure, it is lacking in terms of posability. So I really wish that if those two things were improved, this would have been a much better figure. As it stands, it is still a really good figure, and it will really stand out on your shelf. So for that alone, this figure is definitely amazing. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative, and I hope it helps you in your purchasing decision for this Killer Croc action figure. If you like this video, please do leave a like. If you want to let me know about something, please put it in the comments. And if you want to help out the channel, definitely do consider subscribing. I've got a lot of new projects and 3D printed action figures coming up in the near future, so look out for that, and I'll see you in the next episode.